Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge, and today we are talking OCS, Operational Combat Series. Specifically, which game in the series is best for learning OCS? Now there have been 19 titles published in the series since its inception back in 1992, although many are out of print and some of the earlier titles have been superseded by subsequent releases. For example, Enemy at the Gates is replaced by Case Blue. Hubay's Pocket is now covered by the Third Winter. And the original Guderian's Blitzkrieg is replaced by Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. But that still leaves quite a number of titles to choose from for the uninitiated who are wanting to get into the system, and it can seem a little daunting. Now, there have been a couple of attempts over the years to design an introductory game to OCS, namely Reluctant Enemies. And I think a good argument can be made that the original Tunisia was also intended as an introductory game. And while those are fine games in and of themselves, I think for various reasons they kind of fall a little short when it comes to being a good intro to the system. For me, whenever I hear anybody ask the question, which game should I start with, there is one game in the series that really stands head and shoulders above all of the others. So let's find out which one that is and why. And the winner is Smolensk, Barbarossa Derailed. This is the 17th game in the series, published by MMP back in 2018. And there are a number of reasons why I think this is the game for any potential OCS players to go out and get first and use this to learn how to play the system. Number one, the OCS was born on the Eastern Front with the original Guderian's Blitzkrieg. It was designed as an operational level game focusing on the principles of maneuver warfare, where the mechanized formations are the real stars of the game. And in the East, you've got two adversaries whose armies are both composed of a mass of traditional foot-bound infantry divisions and then a smaller core of mechanized formations that provide most of the offensive punch. And OCS does just a beautiful job of illustrating the differences in capabilities between these two types of formations within each army. And I think even though the Western Front games are great games, the force structures, the distances involved, the infrastructure of the theaters where the campaigns were fought is different from what you find in Russia. And therefore, if you're going to want to experience the fullest potential of OCS, you really need to play Eastern Front OCS. Now, I do think it's a testament to the strength of the design that OCS is perfectly capable of handling any campaign from the frozen steppes of Russia to the boiling jungles of Burma with practically no modification. But there are some things that you'll find in the Eastern Front OCS games that you don't really see very much in the Western Front games, and that are a kind of an important part of the game. And let me explain what I mean by that. For example, OCS uses a two-pronged supply system. They've got a trace supply system, which is used to determine whether or not your formations are going to be able to eat or starve. And then they have a system that uses discrete supply points. And these supply points are distributed and moved about the map and expended in order to allow motorized units to move and for any combat to be conducted. Now, the trace supply system is based off of railheads. Units will be able to trace overland back to a railhead and then back ultimately to a supply source. But each individual unit cannot trace very far. So the system has introduced headquarters units, which represent higher level, say, corps and army level assets. And those headquarters are able to trace back to the railhead and then throw that trace supply a greater distance forward to the troops at the front line. But in Russia, even that's not enough many times. And so where the railheads leave off, wagons and trucks need to pick up the slack and move the supplies from the railheads further forward. Most of the time, you're going to have your truck units, your truck points, and your wagon points moving supply points across the map. However, another use for those transport points is to form what are called extenders in the game. And what these do is you can gather 5 of these points together, turn them into an extender, and place that in a specific location on the map. That extender will be able to trace back a certain distance to the closest railhead. So essentially what it's doing is it is extending the railhead forward in some instances by quite a distance, which then allows the headquarters to trace to the extender just as if it were a railhead and then throw that supply forward to the frontline units. And the rail network in Russia is not nearly as dense or developed as you find in Western Europe. And so there are times when both sides, the Germans and the Soviets, need to put these extenders in place in order to keep their offensives moving forward. And one of the skills that every OCS player needs to master is managing your extenders. When to form an extender, where to place the extender, how to protect your extenders, and conversely, how to disrupt your opponent's trace supply by taking out his extenders. The Western Front games, really because of the dense rail network and the smaller theater sizes, you don't really use extenders to the extent, if you will, that you need them over in Russia. And it's a big part of the game, it's a big part of the system, and I think if you're going to learn OCS, you're going to want to be exposed to dealing with the extenders as early as you can. And Smolensk is a game where you are going to need extenders as the Germans if you're going to have any hope of winning the game. Number 2, Smolensk has the latest version of the series rules, version 4.3. In fact, Smolensk is the first game published in the series that contained version 4.3, and these are still the current series rules as of November 2021. So you can see that it's been stable for the past 3 years and 2 subsequent releases. Now, being a mature system that's been around going on 30 years now, they've been able to take advantage of the experience that players and designers have had over the decades to refine the system, including refining the rulebook. And I will say that this version 4.3 rulebook is one of the best rulebooks I've seen for any game out there. It's well organized, it's well written, it's clear and concise, it has a nice index, and it even has a useful, especially for players new to the system, it has a very useful section in the back where terms and abbreviations that are used in OCS are defined for the player. So again, another advantage of getting Smolensk and learning OCS is that you're going to have the latest and greatest when it comes to the rules. Number 3, size. Now, a player new to the system does not want to get overwhelmed with some monster OCS game. And many of the Eastern Front titles in the series are just that. These are big monster games. But on the other hand, getting something like Reluctant Enemies, I don't think is going to serve you very well because it's too small to really give you a good look at what OCS is all about. Like I said, Reluctant Enemies, it's a fine game. It's great for experienced OCS players looking for something small and quick that they can play. But if that's your introduction to the system, there's going to be a lot about OCS that you never really are able to understand or experience. And I don't think Reluctant Enemies, or say Tunisia for that matter, is a good game to set you up to experience some of the larger games in the series. Now with Smolensk, you have a one-map game, just one map. So what you're seeing here on screen is the entire footprint for this game. It comes with 7 scenarios plus an introductory scenario. And of those scenarios, one of them is a campaign scenario that lasts 19 turns. Now you compare that with campaign scenarios in other games like DAC and Guderian's Blitzkrieg that are 220 turns long or 140 turns long, and all of a sudden the Smolensk campaign scenario seems very, very doable. Not only do you have a small footprint, but you also have a manageable number of formations, but still get a sizable chunk of forces to push around the map. So you're getting what I would consider a full OCS experience in a small package, which allows the new player to not be just overwhelmed right off the bat, while at the same time you're going to be able to you're going to have enough forces to be able to do what OCS allows you to do in the system. So again, the size for Smolensk, I think, is absolutely ideal for the new player. Number 4, there aren't a lot of complicated special rules in Smolensk. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Gamer's designs, every Gamer's game comes with 2 rule books. There's the series rule book, which we looked at earlier. That's the version 4.3. That's going to contain all of the rules you need to play any OCS game. Then in each OCS game, there will be a second game-specific rule book that we see here. Inside this rule book, you will find the game notes for this particular game. You'll find the scenarios. You'll also find the game-specific rules. Now, in a lot of the games, there are a lot of game-specific rules. Smolensk, however, has a grand total of 4 pages of additional rules that you need to learn after you figure out the core rules for the system. And if you look here, you'll see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rules. This is basically where the rules stop. You have one column that explains the victory conditions, and then we are right into the scenario setups. And a lot of these 4 pages of rules are basically telling you where reinforcements arrive, what the supply sources are, very basic, simple things. So the last thing that a new player trying to learn a game system needs is a bunch of complicated, special one-off rules that only apply in this particular game. And Smolensk does a beautiful job of keeping that to a minimum. It also has relatively straightforward and simple terrain, so you're not dealing with a bunch of complicated terrain rules either. You've basically got open terrain, woods terrain, forest, and marsh, some rivers, and maybe some cities. In the grand scheme of things, the Smolensk game-specific rules are very light, and again, I think that's a big plus for anybody trying to get into the system. Yet another reason why I recommend Smolensk. Number 5, the situation. The game covers the fighting in and around Smolensk from the 8th of July 1941 through the 8th of September 1941, so right at 2 months. But far from being a one-sided butt-kicking, this game actually presents both players with the opportunity to attack and defend. In fact, it's more than presenting an opportunity, it's actually going to require both sides to attack and defend if they have any hope of winning the game. Now, it's true, at the beginning of the campaign, the Germans hold the initiative as their armored spearheads are advancing onto the map from the western edge. And for the first roughly half of the campaign, the Germans are the ones doing most of the attacking. However, as the campaign drags on, the Germans are going to find most of their mobile formations withdrawn from the game and sent further south to deal with the Kiev pocket. That provides the Red Army with a wonderful opportunity to make some serious and dangerous attacks on the Germans. Now, it's one thing for the Germans to actually attack and capture their objectives. It's another thing entirely for them to try to hold on to what they have gained. And even when they are attacking early in the game, this is still not a walk in the park for the Germans. You are going to have to learn how to get the most out of every single supply point you spend and every single turn that your panzer divisions are activating and moving about the map. Likewise, for the Soviet player, you're going to have to learn how to try to stop a full-out assault by several German panzer divisions. At the same time, you're also going to have to master the art of attacking. OCS does not place any arbitrary restrictions on how you use your forces. So, as the Soviet player, you are more than welcome to attempt to attack in the same style using the same tactics as the German army does. But if you do, the system is going to punish you rather severely. The Soviets can attack successfully in OCS, but due to the nature of their army and the force composition, they've got to do it in a little different way than the German army does. That's one of the really beautiful things about OCS. One of the more enjoyable things is learning how to conduct operations with different armies, different organizations, and getting the most out of each of them. And Smolensk offers that opportunity to the first-time player right out of the box. You are going to understand how to run an attack with a couple of Panzer Corps. It's going to be enough. There are going to be enough units on the map to give you a real sense of what OCS is all about, but not so much that you're just hopelessly overwhelmed. And again, you're going to learn how to counterattack as the Soviets, how to stop the panzer divisions. You're going to have to learn how to deal with extenders and protecting supply lines and cutting your opponent's supply lines. It's just a really all-around great situation, and I do think it's the best so far in the series for new players to experience. Number 6, it's still in print. Having been released only 3 years ago, Smolensk, as of late November 2021, is still available directly from MMP on their website for $92 plus shipping. And if it's directly available from MMP, you can be sure that you'll be able to find new copies of it at online retailers as well, probably at a discount even from that price. And while $92 is not an inconsiderable sum of money, when you look at the cost for the other remaining in-print games, ranging anywhere from $140 up to $200 for the third winter, Smolensk really is an economical entry point for folks into the system. And I don't even want to start talking about the prices for some of the out-of-print games. Reluctant Enemies, even if it were the ideal introductory game for new players to OCS, is something I still couldn't recommend. Because it's out of print, it's extraordinarily hard to find, and whenever a copy does come up on the secondary market, the asking prices are always insanely high. For what you would spend to acquire a copy of Reluctant Enemies, you could go ahead and buy a new copy of Smolensk and a new copy of the Third Winter, most likely. So Smolensk, being in print, it's readily available. And again, another reason why I think this is the game that anybody considering getting into OCS should go out and grab first. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. Again, my wholehearted recommendation to anybody asking which game to start with in the OCS is Smolensk. Now, if there are any OCS veterans out there watching this video, let me know your thoughts on what you'd recommend for new players down in the comments below. Appreciate you watching today, and we'll see you again next time.